Hello guys, welcome to a new video and a new movie story. Before we start, please hit the like and subscribe buttons. And suggest any movie you want in the comment section. Let's get started with today's film, The Incredibles 2. Specialist Rick Dicker, Jonathan Banks, is meeting a kid named Tony Reidinger. Tony lets him know how he got together with a schoolmate named Violet Parr, Sarah Vowell, at a track and field competition meet, and they consented to go out on the town together. Afterward, in the parking area, a supervillain who called himself the Underminer, John Ratzenberger, tunneled up through the ground and said he was proclaiming battle on harmony and joy. Every other person dissipated, yet Tony wound up with no simple getaway course, so he dodged behind a vehicle and watched what unfurled. He saw a group of superheroes in matching suits, and the mother advised one of the children to watch the edge and ward individuals off, and the other one to watch the child, Jack. As the Guardians pursued the Underminer, Tony saw an amazing chance to get away. However, at that point he perceived the voice of the young lady. The kid escaped with super speed to carry out border responsibility, abandoning her with the child. Baffled, she ripped off her cover and tossed it on the ground. Then Tony saw that she was Violet. Seeing him taking a gander at her, she approached him and attempted to make sense of, however he just took off. He educates Rick that he feels terrible concerning what he did, and he wishes he could simply neglect truly seeing Violet in her supersuit. The Underminer drilled once more into the ground, setting off an underground blast that made bank structures break down into the ground. Penetrating through the vaults, he utilized a cylinder with vacuum pull to snatch cash from the vaults. Mr. Incredible, Craig T. Nelson, stands up to him, and the Underminer moves in the direction of him, sucking him into the cylinder. He arrived in the tunneler's stockpiling vault and banged out with super strength. The Underminer puts the drill on autopilot, and both of them battled. Mr. Incredible drove the Underminer into the drill's control board, crushing it. The Underminer hopped into the vault and evaded, leaving Mr. Incredible to manage the now crazy drill. It burst through the surface into the road. Run, Huck Milner saw a residue cloud somewhere far off and ran toward it, with Violet pushing Jack in his carriage and pursuing Dash. Elastigirl, Holly Hunter, extended herself starting with one structure then onto the next, getting up to speed to the pitching drill. It rammed into a help segment, obliterating the monorail track right as a vehicle drew closer. Unexpectedly, their companion Frozone, Samuel L. Jackson, skimmed in and made a track that directed the monorail securely to the ground. The drill was all the while running down the road, scratching the sides of structures en route. The drill hit a vehicle and flung it very high, and Dash approached an elderly person and hauled her far removed not long before the vehicle crashed down. Violet made up for lost time to him and gave off Jack in the buggy. Elastigirl extended herself across a bridge, preventing vehicles from getting on a scaffold as the drill obliterated the backings. Mr. Incredible got a fallen streetlight and tossed it into the tracks, yet it before long snapped. Run approached him and put Jack in his grasp. Violet hurled force fields to shield spectators from the machine. Mr. Incredible ran past her and gave Jack back to her. Elastigirl bounced out of the shadows lid of the drill, with the remainder of the family pursuing it. They saw that it was going directly toward City Hall. Elastigirl loosened up through the motor, attempting to spill the coolant so it would overheat. Mr. Incredible bounced in and helped her, and they halted the drill barely shy of City Hall. Violet and Dash bounced in, and she put a power field around the entire family not long before the motor blew. Peering out the seal, they saw themselves encompassed by cops with their weapons drawn. Rick Dicker gives the family a ride, and Violet lets them know that Tony had seen her without her veil. Rick carries them to the lodging where they've been remaining since their home had been obliterated. Rick lets them know that the super relocation program has been closed down, and he can allow them to remain in the inn for 2 additional weeks, after which they'll be all alone. They express farewell to him, and take a seat at the table to eat Chinese takeout. Violet inquires as to whether they will discuss the day's occasions. Helen lets them know that things are different now, with supers being prohibited to accomplish legend work. Violet inquires as to whether that implies they will return to never utilizing their powers. In the wake of going this way and that, Helen hurls her give-over on the table, finishing the discussion. Sometime thereafter, after the children nodded off, Bob and Helen are sitting at the inn pool, thinking about the thing they will do. Helen lets him know that one of them should find a customary line of work. Out of nowhere, Lucius appears, and he offers to allow the family to move in with himself and his significant other, Honey, Kimberly Adair Clark, after their time in the lodging is up. Then, at that point, he lets them know that during the underminer assault, a man who addresses the business mogul Winston DeVore, Bob Odenkirk, gave him a business card, and said that Winston needed to converse with Lucius, Bob and Helen. With no different choices, they consent to the gathering. Them three appear outside a tremendous structure, the Central Command of DevTech. They get security identifications and take the lift to the highest level, and are welcomed by Winston. A lady likewise strolls up and Winston presents her as his sister, Evelyn, Catherine Keener. He lets them know he saw how they managed their children before, and they shoot each other a look, acknowledging he knows their mysterious characters. He says he used to work for Rick a long time back, before the supers were constrained into stowing away, and he makes sense of that Rick seriously loved them. Rick had an immediate telephone line introduced in the DeVore house, so they could consider the supers any time they required them. Winston lets them know that one night criminals broke into their home, and his dad attempted to call Gazerbeam and Pharaonic, yet since supers had been banned, neither one of them replied. The cheats tracked down his father and shot him. A couple of months after the fact, Winston's mother passed on from disaster. That's what he says on the off chance that the supers hadn't been secluded from everything, it could never have worked out. Evelyn counters that her father ought to have been covered up himself at the earliest difficult situation, and Winston makes sense of that they've had that contention until the end of time. From that point forward, Winston and Evelyn constructed DevTech, a media communications organization, determined to right a few wrongs. Winston and Evelyn make sense of that the supers have been sequestered from everything due to individuals' discernment. All they see is the annihilation the supers cause, not the hard choices they make or the lives they save. That's what to change. Evelyn shows them that there are cameras in their identifications, and says their new supersuits will have cameras also. Winston says they simply should be super, and he'll ensure they'll be in every way legitimate again sometime in the not-so-distant future. Eagerly, Bob asks what their most memorable task will be. However, Winston says that Elastigirl ought to be the main super that the public finds in real life. Sway hesitantly concurs, yet Helen is as yet uncertain. Them three appear outside a tremendous structure, the Central Command of DevTech. They get security identifications and take the lift to the highest level, and are welcomed by Winston. A lady likewise strolls up and Winston presents her as his sister, Evelyn, Catherine Keener. He lets them know he saw how they managed their children before, and they shoot each other a look, acknowledging he knows their mysterious characters. He says he used to work for Rick a long time back, before the supers were constrained into stowing away, and he makes sense of that Rick seriously loved them. Rick had an immediate telephone line introduced in the DeVore house, so they could consider the supers any time they required them. Winston lets them know that one night criminals broke into their home, and his dad attempted to call Gazerbeam and Pharaonic, yet since supers had been banned, neither one of them replied. The cheats tracked down his father and shot him. A couple of months after the fact, Winston's mother passed on from disaster. That's what he says on the off chance that the supers hadn't been secluded from everything, it could never have worked out. Evelyn counters that her father ought to have been covered up himself at the earliest difficult situation, and Winston makes sense of that they've had that contention until the end of time. From that point forward, Winston and Evelyn constructed DevTech, a media communications organization, determined to right a few wrongs. Winston and Evelyn make sense of that the supers have been sequestered from everything due to individuals' discernment. All they see is the annihilation the supers cause, not the hard choices they make or the lives they save. That's what to change. Evelyn shows them that there are cameras in their identifications, and says their new supersuits will have cameras also. Winston says they simply should be super, and he'll ensure they'll be in every way legitimate again sometime in the not-so-distant future. Eagerly, Bob asks what their most memorable task will be. However, Winston says that Elastigirl ought to be the main super that the public finds in real life. Sway hesitantly concurs, yet Helen is as yet uncertain. Back at the inn, Bob asks Helen for what good reason she would have zero desire to pursue the open door, and she makes sense of that the youngsters will require her. Run is battling with math, and Violet is apprehensive about her forthcoming date with Tony. Jack, being a child, will normally require bunches of consideration, regardless of whether he has abilities. Neither of them realize that he had utilized his abilities once previously, to escape from being captured by Syndrome, since at the time they were on the ground and he was up high, past their sight. Sway advises her that the decision is to impact the world to permit their youngsters to be what their identity is, or to before long be destitute conceivably. She inquires as to whether he'll be alright watching the children, and he says he can deal with it with no issue. Resting to rest, they realized tomorrow they'd tell Winston that Elastigirl was in. Winston sends a limo to get the family and take them to a tremendous house that he claims, and he says they can remain as long as they need. Afterward, Elastigirl emerges from the restroom wearing her new supersuit, one that was planned by Alexander Galbaki. Weave prods her that when Edna Mode, Brad Bird, finds out, she will not be cheerful. Helen finds a note from Evelyn saying there's something in the carport for her. She goes out and finds a bike that can part into 2 sections. Weave looks as she brings off down the road. The following morning, Bob fixes breakfast for the children, and Violet inquires as to whether Helen is violating the law by accomplishing legend work. Sway is feeling better to see the school transport pull up, and sends the children off. That evening, Violet prepares for her date with Tony. Sway peruses Jack a sleep-time story, and the child nods off. Sway then, at that point, attempts to assist Dash with his numerical schoolwork. However, Dash lets him know they need the issues done a specific way, and afterward says he'll simply hold on until Helen returns home. The TV turns on, and Bob is astounded to see Jack sitting on the sofa. He takes him back up to his room and peruses another story. In the city, Elastigirl is in participation at the uncovering function of a new hovertrain. The city chairman gives a discourse as the Devores watch in a studio through Helen's body cam. The city chairman trimmed the strip, and the train got its most memorable gathering of travelers. It lifts up and unexpectedly steers off course. Elastigirl hops on her cycle and takes off after it. Riding through burrows and on roofs, she can arrive on top of the train. Before she can design her best course of action, the train goes into a passage. She jettisons the bicycle and straightens herself on the rooftop. She arrives at the designer and thinks that he is looking directly ahead. Emerging from the passage, Elastigirl makes herself into a parachute and eases back the train to a stop. Returning to the specialist, she sees a beating light in his lodge. A message shows up on a screen expressing, "Welcome back, Elastigirl the screenslaver." Bounce continues to attempt to get Jack to remain in his bed, with no karma. Going first floor, he views as Violet, who never left for her date, and she tells him not to say anything. Sway returns to the parlor and sits Jack down close to him and nods off. On the TV, a film is playing with a covered looter holding a man at gunpoint. Jack sees the covered man, and afterward glances through the window and sees a raccoon scrounging through the rubbish. He approaches the window and can go through it with his powers. Getting a half-destroyed chicken leg from the raccoon, he tosses it back in the trash bin and uses one more ability to lift the top with his brain and hurl it down on the can. Then laser radiates emerge from his eyes, simply missing the raccoon. Weave awakens from the upheaval and goes outside to get Jack. All at once, the child split into 6 separate duplicates of himself. Bounce understands that Jack has various superpowers. Taking Jack back inside, Bob gets a call from Helen. She asks him how things are going, and he lies and says the children are okay. She enlightens him regarding saving the out-of-control train, and he turns on the TV to see news reports about the sensational salvage. She expresses gratitude toward him for dealing with the children, and they hang up. Bounce puts Dash and Jack to bed, and afterward airs out Dash's numerical book. Afterward, he awakens Dash and lets him know that he grasps the numerical statements and can help Dash before school begins. Elastigirl is preparing to be consulted by a reporter named Chad Brentley. Chad is meeting an unfamiliar minister as Helen sits in a green room, apprehensively sitting tight for her turn. A phase hand comes in and strolls her toward the stage. The diplomat sees Helen and welcomes her eagerly. Chad acquaints Elastigirl with the crowd, and she leaves to the stage. Out of nowhere, Chad's eyes space out and he begins talking in a mechanical droning. Following his eyes, Helen sees a flickering light on a screen. She turns away with perfect timing to try not to be entranced herself. Chad says that everybody is being constrained by screens. Helen advances toward the control room, where she finds everybody looking forward vacantly. The mechanical voice keeps saying that the screens are being constrained by the screenslaver. The voice says the screenslaver will commandeer the representative's aerocade, and Helen runs and crushes a window. Extending herself of the structure, she jumps on a housetop and sees 3 helicopters airborne. Sending off herself like a slingshot, she crashes through one of the helicopter's windows, yet the diplomat isn't there. She advises the pilot to get her near another copter, and she takes the leap. Finding the envoy toward the back, she make the way for the cockpit and sees the pilots in a daze. She crushes the screen with the squinting light to bring them back. All of a sudden, the third chopper crushes into them. Battling to acquire control, she inquires as to whether they can swim, then, at that point, pushes them out so they land in the stream beneath. Then she snatches the envoy and slings herself very high, making a parachute to bring the minister securely to the ground. The following morning, Bob is preparing the children for school. Violet looks terrible and lets him know that yesterday at school, she asked Tony for what reason he stood her up, and he behaved as he didn't have the foggiest idea about her by any means. Sway advises her that Rick has needed to eradicate many individuals' recollections after they figured out his or Helen's mysterious character. Violet understands that Rick had eradicated Tony's memory after Bob told him to. Stepping off, she gets her supersuit and stuffs it in the waste disposal and turns it on. Be that as it may, since the suit is indestructible, nothing happens to it. Irately, she gets it and tosses it against the wall, promising at no point ever to be a legend in the future. Helen is in a limousine, being given a ride back to the DevTech building. There, a gathering cheer for her, doing right by her vibe. However, she realizes the screenslaver is still out there. Inside, Winston gives her a paper that has a title about the envoy giving a favorable to super discourse, and he tells her their arrangement is working. She attempts to be energetic, yet she's actually stressed over the screenslaver. He drives her into a room loaded up with other superheroes in ensemble. One of the ladies presents herself as Void, Sophia Bush, and exhibits her ability to create entrances that can immediately ship individuals or things anyplace. Different supers come up and present themselves as Screech, Brick, Reflux and Electric. They generally visited some time, and Helen is pleased with the constructive outcome she's had on them. Conversing with Evelyn, Helen hits upon an arrangement to draw the screenslaver out. Evelyn will make a GPS beacon, and keeping in mind that Chad interviews Helen from a distance, they'll follow the sign. Sway calls Rick and inquires as to whether he cleaned Tony's memory, then makes sense of that he went excessively far, eradicating all memory of Violet from his brain. Rick answers that memory cleaning is definitely not a careful science. Weave asks Rick for any data he has about Tony, and Rick lets him know that Tony's folks own an eatery where he works after school. That evening, Bob takes the children out to supper. Violet asks why he's taking them across town to one explicit cafe. Taking a seat at the table, they're welcomed by their server, Tony. Surprised, Violet shoots water out of her nose, and Tony offers her napkins to tidy herself up. Bounce attempts to drive Violet into talking with Tony, however she simply gets more humiliated and furious. She drives herself away from the table and leaves the eatery. At the station, Chad is chatting with Helen through a screen, and she lets him know that she's at a protected, undisclosed area. She's on top of the structure, on a transmission tower. Chad shows film from the hovertrain salvage, when the screenslaver shows up on the screens. Enacting her tracker, Helen finds the wellspring of the sign. The screenslaver blusters about how individuals are constrained by screens since they're languid. In the meantime, Elastigirl vaults starting with one structure then onto the next, focusing in on the source. At long last, she shows up at a high rise. Winding her arm under the entryway, she opens it and runs in. The screenslaver shows up behind her and drives her and himself into a monster confine, then, at that point, destroys her with a taser. He turns on squinting lights to entrance her, however she figures out how to push him out of the enclosure and crawl out herself. They battle around the room, then, at that point, he runs out the entryway, initiating a clock on the exit plan. She pursues him, and he enacts an alarm, making others come running out. He descends a deep opening and onto a housetop, with Helen in pursuit. Abruptly, he jumps off the rooftop. Helen bounces after him, snatches him and makes a parachute. As the clock hits 0, the structure explodes, and she comes to up and gets the veil off his face. On the ground, he's driven away in cuffs by the police, acting confounded. Helen says thanks to Evelyn for setting up the tracker. Back at the house, Dash asks Bob for assist with his new number-related illustration. Sitting in front of the TV, Bob sees a tale about how a vehicle called the Incredible, a vehicle he once possessed when he was a public superhuman, had been purchased by a tycoon at a sale. Thinking the vehicle had been annihilated alongside his home, Bob furiously scrounges through certain crates and tracks down the old controller for the vehicle. Squeezing a button, he makes the vehicle start on the screen. Run grabs the remote and starts squeezing buttons. Everybody in the studio hides from the apparently live vehicle. Weave snatches the remote back and powers it down. Unexpectedly, Jack wheezes and magically transports himself into Violet's room. She runs down the steps shouting, as Jack currently has transformed into a red beast, pursuing her. Jack turns around into his typical self, and Dash and Violet acknowledge he has abilities, and Bob hadn't told them. Violet inquires as to whether he told Helen, and he says no. At the point when she inquires as to why, he indignantly lets them know that he's Mr. Incredible, and he's attempting to keep the house intact through everything. Shocked, Violet says that she will call Lucius. Sway awakens sluggish, and acknowledges he had been resting on the lounge chair. Violet removed his shoes and gave him a sweeping and pad. Afterward, he goes to Edna's home and says thanks to her for watching Jack. She says that she remained up the entire evening, dealing with a suit that will control his powers in general. Putting Jack into the testing chamber, she shows Bob how Jack's suit can guess which of his powers he's going to utilize. At the point when Jack transforms into a fire, the suit initiates a quencher with blackberry seasoned fire retardant splashing all over him, and he cheerfully licks it up. Alleviated at long last having some control, Bob takes Jack and places him in the vehicle. As the flickering lights in the goggles go out, Helen wakes from her daze, ending up lashed to a seat. Attempting to move, she lets out a shout of agony. Evelyn comes on the radio and tells her that the temperature around her is beneath freezing, and that assuming she attempts to extend, she'll break. Helen understands that Evelyn is the genuine screenslaver, and the individual she locked away was a guiltless casualty. Helen lets Evelyn know that she relied on her, and Evelyn asks her for what good reason, since she fabricated her a bicycle. Evelyn says that they didn't actually know one another. Helen gets some information about her sibling, and Evelyn answers that he's feeble, contingent upon the supers to constantly save him, very much like his dad did. Helen inquires as to whether she will kill her, and Evelyn says that she intends to utilize her all things being equal. Back at the house, the children see Jack in his new suit. Bounce shows the way that he can now control the child, with Jack utilizing his laser eyes on order. Then Jack utilizes his twist ability to vanish, and Bob shows them a gadget to examine for his area. Seeing him in the corner, Dash holds out a treat, which Jack returns to snatch and eat down. The telephone rings, and Evelyn lets Bob know that Helen is in a tough situation. She says she would rather not express out loud whatever occurred on the telephone, and it's ideal on the off chance that he meets her at DevTech, where the boat is moored. Bounce quickly calls Lucius and advises him to watch the children, and to bring his super suit, since things could get strange. Dubious at Bob's unexpected leaving, Dash runs and snatches the vehicle's controller, and Violet gets out the super suits and has them generally place the suits on. The doorbell rings, and they open it to see different supers from the party, all being controlled with a couple of goggles. Lucius comes over, and he sees Jack unexpectedly turn imperceptible. Exhausted, Bob gets treats and holds one up to draw Jack out. He returns, gets the treat and crunches on it. Bounce lets Lucius know that he can't continue to give Jack treats. Yet when he stops, the red beast shows up and begins gnawing Bob's arm. Frantic for some alleviation, Bob takes Jack and drives up to Edna's home. Seeing him appearing as though he hadn't dozed in days, she welcomes him in. He tells her that he wants some alone time, and inquires as to whether he can leave Jack with her. Jack sees her face and changes his own nose to seem to be hers. Step by step, he changes the remainder of his face to match her. Captivated by his powers, she consents to take him and rapidly pushes Bob out the entryway. Weave returns to the house and falls on the couch. He is sorry to Violet for having Rick delete Tony's memory, then compounding the situation at the cafe. He says he's simply attempting to be a decent father, and Violet answers that he's bad, he's super. She embraces him, prior to understanding that he nodded off sitting up. At the Devers' home, a party was going with video playing of Elastigirl getting the screenslaver. Winston declares that supers will be lawful in the future, and he victoriously holds up the screenslaver's suit and goggles, saying that Elastigirl is the person who made it all conceivable. He says they'll consent to an arrangement on his boat, the Everjust, and it will be broadcast all over the planet. Helen rewatches the recording of the screenslaver catch, and she understands that something isn't exactly correct. She gets away to the control room and watches a portion of the crude film. Evelyn arrives behind her with drinks, glad to be away from the group. She lets Helen know that her sibling knows how to deal with individuals, yet she, at the end of the day, never understands what they need. Helen asks her what she thinks they need, and she answers that individuals esteem ease more than anything. Helen tells her that she thinks getting the screenslaver was too simple. Then she sees that one of the screenslaver's screens is fixed on her suit camera. Evelyn says that he probably hacked into the shut circuit. However, that's what Helen answers, assuming he had the option to do that. He wouldn't have straightforward locks on his entryway. She understands that he personally probably been spellbound by the goggles he was wearing, and she snatches the goggles to investigate them. With a quick move, Evelyn powers the goggles onto Helen's head. The children find Jack in a lobby and get him. With different supers coming behind, they conceal an event. Attempting to keep Jack calm, they give him the tracker to play with. Hearing Jack coo, Crushower utilizes his ability to crush the vent. Blowing up, Jack changes into a monster child and blasts out of the vent, taking out Crushower and obliterating the tracker. Violet purposes a treat to quiet Jack, who gets it and goes crushing through the walls, making a beeline for the room where the supers are assembled. Turning around to his typical size, he magically transports through the last wall. Run and Violet search for one more way in. As the marking function goes live, Evelyn assumes command over each of the supers, having them tell the world that they don't serve individuals any longer, just themselves. They reach toward the camera, and the feed goes dead. Back at the studio, Chad clumsily advises the crowd to hold on as they figure out their specialized issues. On the boat, Evelyn looks as Mr. Incredible, Elastigirl and Frozone secure the representatives in the room with different supers. They head up to the scaffold and immediately incapacitate a watchman, who gets on his radio and shouts that supers have taken the boat. Elastigirl turns the controlling wheel, directing the boat on a way toward the city. Mr. Incredible smashes the wheel, delivering the boat unstirable. Run and Violet follow Jack to the extension, and decisively, their folks in Frozone assault them. Violet hurls a power field for security, and Jack floats through the air, arrival in Elastigirl's arms. With her quickly confounded, Jack comes to up and rips off her goggles. Evelyn orders Mr. Incredible and Frozone to snatch her, however she rips off their goggles. Void lets them know that they're undependable, and the Devores sent them for security. All at once, Frozone runs up and remains among them and the children, yet they're not expected to tell them. He attempts to close the entryway, yet they block him. Run presses a button on the remote, enacting the Incredible, which impacts out of its carport and flies toward the house. Frozone shoots the supers with an ice wall and pummels the entryway. Run snatches Jack as the supers force their direction in. Run attempts to run outside, yet he continues to end up still inside the house, on account of Void's entries. As Frozone is battling Screech, Violet makes a power field around herself and her siblings to protect them from Hellectrix's destroying impacts. As Crushower attempts to smash the power field, the Incredible flies in and stops not long before them. Run and Violet get in and escape, yet different supers snatch Frozone and put a couple of goggles on his head. Evelyn takes Bob to see Helen on the boat, and when he strolls in, Helen begins smacking him upside the head. Paralyzed right away, Bob attempts to retaliate, however he can't force himself to go after his better half. As she comes at him with additional punches and kicks, he gets her and attempts to break her daze. She kisses him, and with shock, he kisses back. Then she stretches and snatches a couple of goggles from Evelyn and puts them on his head. Evelyn lets Winston know that the legends are on the boat, resting, and he arranges the boat to take off. In The Incredible, Dash and Violet pause for a minute to choose what to do. They understand they have just themselves, the vehicle and Jack. They get to the DevTech building and see the boat take off. Run wishes the vehicle could follow the boat, and it drives itself off the harbor and into the water. Flying itself along, the vehicle rapidly makes up for lost time to the boat. Violet asks how they'll get on the boat, and Dash answers that it would be perfect assuming the vehicle had ejector seats. A message moves quickly over the dashboard, ejector seats enacted. Suddenly they wind up flying through the air toward the boat. Violet encompasses them with a power field, permitting them to land securely at hand. All at once, Winston enacts the boat's hydrofoil, making it float out of the water. Evelyn has Winston accumulate the supers in a space for the marking function. Violet sees them go into the room, then returns to Dash to find that Jack had disappeared. Utilizing the tracker, they find him going up in a lift. They go to follow, yet are cut off by Void, who assaults Violet. She attempts to retaliate by utilizing force fields, however Void continues to open entryways to avoid them. Run takes off after Jack, yet he understands Violet isn't behind him, so he runs back and speed punches Void before she can put goggles on Violet. With the boat getting some distance from the city, a huge wave gets kicked up. Frozone freezes it to make a pad for the side of the boat to run into. Thusly, despite the fact that the boat steers into the rocks into the city on a sideways direction, it is generally halted securely without critical injury or property harm. Helen goes to Bob and inquires as to whether she missed Jack's most memorable power, and he says more like the initial 17. Evelyn is driven into a squad car in cuffs, and she lets Helen know that saving her life doesn't make them right, yet Helen is undeterred at her foe's comment. Sway tells Violet that she ought to take a stab at acquainting herself with Tony once more. Days after the fact, an adjudicator decides that supers ought to be made lawful once more. At school, Violet approaches Tony and presents herself. They visit for some time, getting to know one another once more. One evening, Tony leaves his entryway and into a vehicle where the Parr family is sitting. They all head off to a performance center together. At the point when they arrive, they see a gathering of squad cars pursuing down a lawbreaker. Violet gets Tony out of the vehicle, hands him cash for tickets and popcorn, and advises him to save her a seat. Befuddled, Tony does as requested. Violet gets back in the vehicle, and they generally put on their suits and covers. Weave presses a button, changing the vehicle into a family estimated Increta cart. Weave raises a ruckus around town, and the family sets off on another experience together. If you make it till the end, thank you so much for watching, and feel free to leave a feedback about this video. See you guys in the next video.